I was first introduced to the game The Suicide of Rachel Foster and its various accompanying issues by YouTuber MertKK. Since I'm generally interested in adventure, horror, walking sims, and narrative-driven games, I was aware of it floating around in the general ether. But what sent me down this brief rabbit hole of bizarreness that is this game was how harshly she curb-stomped it. And I thought, okay, there's no way the game is this straightforward and obtuse with its subject matter, which, if you're listening to this, you probably know about already. I thought, at the bare minimum, she had to be missing something here, like the actual point was the main character's delusions about the situation. At one point, she even mentions that she thought maybe Nicole, the player character, had Stockholm Syndrome, but then doesn't bring it up again. So I thought maybe she just wasn't willing to give it the benefit of the doubt based on the crappy handling of the themes and subject in general. And then I watched a playthrough. Oh boy. After that, I checked out a video from the channel PimScript who clarified some points, specifically the extremely generic and calculated public statements the developer has made in interviews about the game. And yet, they didn't seem to know what they were doing either. Just getting right into it, after a disclaimer about the themes of the game, there's a loading screen that says, "The story you are about to live is shaped by its details. Observing everything with care will lead you to the truth," unquote. This was major mistake number one. The game is super linear and you aren't solving any puzzles or trying to assemble a more clear picture of the events by the end of the game. There's nothing to arrange. As the player, there's nothing to shape or even organize. The game doesn't have anything to say about its own depicted events, so this kind of get ready for a mystery gang thing at the beginning just adds to the distaste of the whole endeavor by the end, especially later when I posit what I think was the intention. In this game, you as the player may pass judgment on or infer or assume what's going on under the surface, whether with specific characters or general situations, but the character you play as, Nicole, has basically no opinion on anything other than the fact that she's cranky at the beginning of the game, wants to leave, and thinks her father is the bee's knees. So this opening statement eventually just comes across as a get-out-of-jail-free card where the writer can say, "Well, you didn't look at the details hard enough, I guess. Sorry." The second major problem that seriously undermines the atmosphere necessary to pull off what this game was trying to do is the wonky-ass dialogue. The actors themselves aren't particularly bad. Nicole's voice actress has a wonderful voice. Irving's actor is probably okay on other things. The issue is with the direction and the writing. The resulting tone of most interactions is just bizarre. There is an insufferable amount of cheesy dialogue and cringy banter between our two main characters. I don't know if it's a translation issue, since the game was made by an Italian, I think, but Nicole alternates between total bitch and whimsical adventurer. She's two different characters. Perhaps she's bipolar, I don't know, the game doesn't say. Irving, on the other hand, is a try-hard weirdo whose nervous, over-the-top, cringy flirtations and constant apologizing make every phone interaction in the game, which is constant, an absolute grating chore. It would be fine if this game were just some kind of generic ghost hunting walking sim, if it was a bit camp, or if off-the-wall funhouse horror shenanigans occurred, but this is about real psychological trauma. The first thing this game needed to do in development, besides a second draft, was to make sure that it nailed a certain level of conversational realism that grounded it to something that our ears recognize as real world. There is almost zero emotional resonance in line delivery here. When you have this constant awkward presentational banter going on with no real feeling bleeding through the words, it makes even more hollow and insensitive the brutal subject matter it's attempting to navigate. Or in this game's case, sharten our laps and run away. Next point and minor nitpick, the Shining references are lazily on the nose. I will give them credit that at least they didn't use the exact carpet from the Overlook Hotel, but they did just use the bathroom that was in the ballroom scenes, the red one where Jack talks to Grady. Why though? An isolated rustic mountain setting is enough. Like, what's with the direct imagery? I know it's probably to tie it together with the end of the game, but the end of the game is an idiotic tack-on that has nothing whatsoever to do with the rest of the game thematically. Back to the issue of characterization in general, the pretense of Irving being with FEMA is nonsense. FEMA doesn't deliver supplies to businesses, let alone no longer operational ones. I think the hotel has been closed for 4 years. Even if there are constant freak weather emergencies happening at the lodge, it's still pushing credibility that it would be Irving personally responding to each of them and then spending enough time there that he somehow becomes knowledgeable of the hotel's inner workings and the gossip regarding the people who work there. So even if FEMA does do something tangentially related to this, it would still, as it did with me, send up a red flag for Nicole. Subpoint B. Nicole is an idiot, or at best easily gaslit, especially when less than 2 minutes later she gets a creepy call from Dennis Reynolds telling her that "you're gonna die tonight, bitch." And then later, in what's a contender for stupidest moment in any game, one that I haven't seen anyone address, is when Irving pretends to say goodnight to a Miss Flattery, and it's clearly him putting on a woman's voice, faking the response, "Good night, Irving." It's bordering on parody at this point, if not just straight up slapstick. Also, what was the point of the persona that Irving puts on in his interactions with Nicole? What was the strategic benefit of the needy weirdo trying to get into her pants routine? I understand that he needed to get her to be comfortable enough to follow these breadcrumbs or whatever, but he could have accomplished the same thing by just being a normal, amiable dude who drip feeds her the necessary implications and manipulations at key times. What I'm saying is that if this were anything like real life, Nicole, especially at the start of the game, would have found someone like Irving completely repulsive and creepy, and would have promptly turned the phone to off permanently. Again, speaking of Nicole's strange bipolarity in this game, she goes from, "I want to leave this place immediately and never think about it again, fuck you, Irving," to "let's solve a mystery, gang," based on very minor prompts. It's silly. There needed to be some transition in her attitude. She turns into Belle from Beauty and the Beast for no apparent reason. She just suddenly becomes entranced by her being stranded in this empty hotel. Why? Is this supposed to be a The Shining thing? Does it hint at something? Did I solve the mystery here? When she showed up at the hotel, was Nicole fully aware of her father being a degenerate, but then the hotel shines her into not caring? Whatever. Midway through the game, we get a stupid ghost hunting red herring. Not even a red herring, it's just a tonally bizarre cul-de-sac where at one point she's in the middle of trying to pick some sound up on a boom mic, investigating the mystery of Rachel, while at the same time recounting this disdainful story about her being at the annual hotel ball and being incredibly jealous of her. Maybe this scene would work in a movie if Nicole were just kind of sarcastically dabbling with some ghost hunting equipment while recounting a sad story, a sort of poetic juxtaposition or something. After that, we get the game's actual major revelation, which is that someone, her father, built a creepy shrine to his victim Rachel, to which our player character Nicole has nothing to say other than, "Don't tell me these things." And then, like a funhouse ride, she and the game just breeze right on past it with little more than some cryptic bullshit about maybe there being squatters in the hotel, maybe it's Rachel herself. Who knows? It was very likely her father, or even if it weren't, it wouldn't matter because the implications of it are still very real. And Nicole just breezes right on past to go uncover the real mystery. Whee! If it was just Irving who set this up along with the rest of the spooky crap in the hotel, then what was this meant to jog in Nicole's memory? What was writing the R word on the chalkboard meant to convey? And Irving doesn't think Leonard is a pedophile, so if anything, he would have torn down and painted over the decoration in that room. Then shortly after that, we get another reveal of the world's most telegraphed twist, where it's only a twist maybe if you're under the age of 20 and don't remember how spotty cell phones were in the not-too-distant past, especially in freaking 1991, when you were lucky to get a call through at all, let alone in a mother-f***ing snowstorm, talking to a guy supposedly from FEMA who, beyond suspiciously, seems to know everything about the hotel. Nicole even says as much at one point in the game, probably an author insert when he realized, oh god, this is getting dumb. And then Nicole just goes, "Durr, okay." The only way this game really works as a psychological horror, if that's even what it was supposed to be, is via the horror of denial, delusion, and coping, looking at those things themselves as the scary shit. The horror of everyone surrounding a tragic situation, looking for answers in every place but the obvious, staring into the gaping void and thinking about carpet samples. But the game doesn't really lend itself to this reading. It's just something you have to infer in the hopes that the characters in-game, or God forbid the writer, aren't total weirdos. The game itself just feels like a weird puzzle of trying to figure out the intended messaging, or even the general intended feelings that I should be feeling. It's often tonally silly, and it sits against this backdrop of heavy darkness that it rarely directly addresses. If the game is meant to be read as a tragedy of denial and of sad coping, then it completely skips the bargaining aspect of this psychologically. We see some blame shifting done by Irving, but the reasoning behind his motivation is so incredibly vague as to be irrelevant. He's just the stereotypical, I was ignored and grew in the shadows bullshit. There's no reason here why he should be insane. If anything, he would have just grown up to be an advocate for people like his sister. Some kind of therapist or social worker, not a freaking Machiavellian sewer dweller. At some point, which the game completely glosses over, he becomes Leonard's familiar, basically, like a disciple into this creepy cult of the beauty of pedophilia. But again, the game doesn't explore this idea. That would have been interesting to learn about. How did that happen? Why wasn't that the game? But again, the game doesn't explore any of its ideas. It's like a kid's puzzle constructed of pieces from different puzzles that all have bytes taken out of them, and then laid together in a row, and then displayed in a gallery to convince us it's art. I think the more ardent complaints against this game are completely valid. The narrative could have just as easily existed if the father had an affair with a 21-year-old, I think. Unless, of course, the writer is excusing this kind of relationship, which they said they weren't, so fine. Perhaps the pedophilic aspect of the narrative was attempting to draw some kind of parallel between Rachel and Nicole as a means of portraying jealousy, abandonment, and fear of replacement in a warped love triangle dynamic. I don't know. Maybe they're just skirting the, in heavy quotes, technicalities of the age of consent for shock value, but mostly as a means of directly tying Nicole to Rachel in their vying for Leonard's affection and love. But here we're reaching the edges of interpretive generosity. Because, once again, the game doesn't go into any of this in any meaningful way. It's all, like I said before, something you as the player have to infer because the game itself is so obtuse. I've seen a few people trying to defend this as, well, sometimes art can just present ideas and doesn't have to overtly condemn or endorse them, that it can allow you to bask in uncomfortable scenarios and navigate your own feelings regarding them, some kind of tension of ambiguity. Well, that's great and all, except that this game doesn't have anything to say about anything. It doesn't even give the player enough of this supposed neutral context to even come to any kind of novel or interesting insight into the situation presented. This game is just, here's thing that make uncomfortable, ? Now break into small groups on message boards to explore how feeling make you feel. With the caveat of, depending on your subjective interpretation of / and whether your culture generally deems late middle-aged adults grooming teenagers creepy, immoral, and or illegal. Art requires some kind of recontextualization. This game, by nature of its construction, has chosen to shelter itself from internal criticism. Criticism in the game world is missing. Criticism in the real world is never missing. This game is a vacuum. It's an unreality. It really feels like the most generous reading of this game is that all of the characters are pathetic and delusional. And yet, the one thing that really prevents even this sort of dismissal of the potential gross negligence on the writer's part is that linchpin scene where Nicole discovers the creepy kid's room, and it's implied that she doesn't find its existence as morally reprehensible or crazy as her father grooming a 16-year-old. Because, and I don't know how in the hell you interpret this in any other way, if her father had made this room, then that would, be real proof that he was lusting after the child aspect of Rachel and not the suggested adult-like teenager? Okay. But, and this is a big but, the writer of this game also chose to throw into the mix that Rachel had dyslexia and was being treated by Leonard. Okay, so wait, is the writing self-aware? Which path are we meant to go down with this? This is either implied evidence that the game is condemning the relationship as predatory overreach by an adult authority figure taking advantage of his position, or it's saying, look how beautiful and helpful Leonard was, painting him as some kind of messianic figure. Really, the game is saying neither because it doesn't present enough information. This strange learning disability angle is really confounding because they could have just as easily left it out. It's clearly a purposefully added dimension to the narrative, but why? The story either barely stays afloat or sinks miserably with this one specific story detail. And a lot of people might be saying, well, dude, it's really obvious that this sort of thing is bad. Yeah, except that the game doesn't present it as wrong. Sure, we generally agree in most societies in 2023 that these kind of relationships are harmful, but the game sidesteps this information. Nicole treats the situation as perhaps slander against her father, but really more as just one of the haunted house exhibits in the hotel that she needs to get to the bottom of. So the only other options regarding what the creepy kids' room is meant to convey are, one, that Leonard made it and is a complete psycho, and Irving left it alone because he 100% agrees with whatever fucked up pedophilic fantasies Irving indulged in, or two, Irving built it to affect Nicole in some kind of way, and if you can explain that to me, then you get the golden motherfucking ticket, because I do not have the foggiest clue what line of reasoning or emotional implication is supposed to be presented here. This game sort of feels like maybe it was going for the Reverick tone of What Remains of Edith Finch, but if that game tried to pass off one of the family members' pedophilia as one of its introspectively whimsical vignettes, maybe this could have worked if the narrative arc had been more like The Beginner's Guide, where a sense of dawning realization begins to come over Nicole and she uncovers repressed memories or accepts that she's been in a semi-permanent defense mode after her family split. Maybe she's so hyper-defensive of her father that she invents a fantasy where the mother is really a murderer in order to cope? ? Might that have salvaged this debacle? Or at the bare minimum of horror twist crap, she could have just set all these crappy warnings up herself to get through to herself? I don't know, man. The suicide of Rachel Foster is so vague and doesn't follow through on anything it puts forth that all I can really do is present several optional interpretations ranging across the implausibility spectrum. Not that any of it really matters, but here we go. The likely reading, and most creepiest, is that Nicole was blinded by jealousy and couldn't understand the beauty of what Rachel had found in her father. Rachel was free and strong. Irving operates as narrative proof that she was of sound mind, essentially an idealization, a very gross and creepy idealization that the game doesn't challenge. The revelation of the game is that Rachel didn't kill herself. She was murdered out of jealousy by Nicole's mother. Therefore, Rachel wasn't unhappy and not trying to escape a painful situation. Gross. The generous reading of the game is that everyone is a delusional, emotionally crippled weirdo who are incapable of accepting the reality of the situation, with Leonard being the most delusional, creepy weirdo of all, i.e. God complex. A very generous reading of the game would be that everything in it is Nicole's insanity. No one else exists. Irving is a split personality. She broke in, camped out, made the conspiracy string boards, and is doing everything in her power to rationalize a fantasy of her father's innocence, even to the point of blaming her mother Claire for a murder and then ending her own life. We get the cliche, "You're home now, Eleanor," spooky, "The house has reclaimed me," ooh, ending. Again, tying into the Shining references. But why and how? It's almost literally just set dressing the entire game. Or hell, I don't know. Maybe even Rachel is just a figment, an extension/externalization of the trauma Nicole was subjected to. That Nicole is also a victim or the victim of her father, but that she's so emotionally repressed that even when faced by the brutal reality of what happened to Rachel, she's completely unreactive. Perhaps this whole project was cursed metafiction. The writer is an alias. There's a ghost writer who writes statements regarding the intent of the game as well. Ooh, I don't know. Or finally, there's a nihilistic reading, that the creators just wanted the horror of this game experience to derive from the fucked up ideas and actions of fucked up people. They just wanted to create a fucked up experience with no moral. And I guess sometimes bad things don't happen to bad people. Sometimes bad people don't learn lessons and just create a quagmire that drags everyone around them down. Wow, that's fun. I mean, if you want to be an edgelord about it, I suppose that's the worst kind of dread imaginable, a scenario where there's no conscience or pushback. So by the end of the game, what it feels like you're left with is either a creepy glorification, an apathetic presentation, or having to completely infer a narrative of delusion that the story doesn't actually engage with or explore. All I can really say is that it commits to psychological denial to its fullest and most isolating extent, I suppose, to the point of being a repellent, odd curiosity that people poke at and wander away. And the thing is, the idea of denial and of rigidly, unconsciously adhering to a status quo is one of the most horrifying realities of human experience. And I believe personally, in conjunction with certain institutions, leads to atrocities, or what we generally term as evil. And everyone has probably experienced this to a certain degree on just a basic familial level, even if it's not overt crimes or overt abuse committed by family members. I think most people understand what it's like to be around people pretending that mental illness, for instance, isn't occurring, not necessarily maliciously denying it or wanting to cover it up, but simply not knowing what to do or how to even approach it and thus ignoring it. And it leads to these very large elephants in very cramped rooms, and yet it's the loneliest and most isolating feeling there is. Dehumanization. Anyway, I would like to assume the author's good intent and take them at their word that this wasn't meant to be defending what a lot of people think it's defending. And I hope as they continue their creative endeavors that they gain some insight and nuance and perhaps speak with a greater artistic clarity in the future. And that's all. The end. End of essay.